Have a seat on your porcelain throne. It's time to talk some shit on the Powell Movement.
Welcome to the Powell Movement. I'm your host, Mike Powell, and holy crap, I made it to episode 400. Congratulations to me. When I started this thing, I had just left my job in partnership marketing, all to start this podcast, and my whole world was totally uncertain. While I believed in myself and my ability to build something from scratch that would be awesome for listeners, it was scary not taking a paycheck for the first time in my life. Well, 8 years later, the risk was totally worth it. And while I didn't blow up and become a Howard Stern or Joe Rogan of action sports podcasting, that was never my plan. My goal was always to have the best guest list in the business and ask the questions that no one else would ask, so you get an entertaining and educational show. I wanted to tell my guest stories better than they've ever been told, and I believe I've done that. And over the years, I've had over 2 million downloads, and nowadays about 10,000 of you check out the channel each week. Thank you for that. It really does mean the world to me. What else means the world to me is my family, and here's where I finally update you on my wife, Ange. If you're new, my wife was rushed to the emergency room 2 years ago. Her stomach exploded, and they were able to save her life with a huge surgery. But we found out she had stage 3 colon cancer. This was such a difficult time, but Ange was a trooper, and she went through chemotherapy and beat cancer, only for it to come back months later as stage 4. That brought more surgery, radiation, and a total of 32 chemotherapy treatments. Each one of these treatments starts with 8 hours in the hospital and then a take-home chemo pack for 2 days, then back to the hospital to have that chemo pack removed. And it sucks every single time. I describe all the terrible side effects that the poison brings her, but I don't have enough time. I just feel so bad for the suffering that she goes through on a daily basis. It's so painful. But what's even worse than that is thinking about what could happen. And I'm not going to dive into that because it's a dark spiral, but let's just say that Ange and I have cried a lot over the past 2 years just thinking about dark stuff. The good news in all of this is our most recent scan. It shows that the tumors have shrunk a lot, but they're still there and they can't surgically be removed, because going in to try to extract them could cause even more harm. We didn't want to believe that, so we went out and got a second opinion, and that's really the deal. Our second opinion confirmed that. So we potentially are up for a trial in the coming months, and we have our fingers crossed that this experimental science will work on Ange. While all of this is so challenging, things are going to get even more difficult for us. While I'm not at liberty to discuss the why right here and now, as of today, my family won't have health insurance coverage in 2025. I can't tell you how stressed I am about this, but it is what it is. The good news is, while I don't like tooting my own horn much, I'm an award-winning marketer with an incredible amount of experience, and on top of that, I'm a problem solver. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go out and get myself a full-time job, and I'm pretty excited about that. While I've been building my own personal brand for 8 years, I've always missed the office life and being part of a team. So I'm going to get a job and make sure I'm there for my family. But I'm also going to remain here for you. I know you need quality podcast entertainment, so the show must go on. And this week, for episode 400, I have such an incredible story for you. Riley Poor had a dream life. Coming up in Crested Butte, Colorado, when so much was happening in skiing, he was able to land a gig with Matchstick Productions at 18 years old, which is unheard of. And then he started traveling the world to make ski films. How cool is that? Well, I could go on and tell you the full story in this intro. I'm not going to because I don't want to ruin the podcast, which I've done in the past and I'm trying not to do in the future. So I will say that this is one that everyone needs to hear. Riley is such an inspiring and positive dude. But before we get into his podcast, I want to thank all of you for listening. Without you and my incredible sponsors, this show wouldn't happen, and I would have returned to work a long time ago. So thank you for that. I also have a few things I'd like you to do for me. First, share my social posts. Second, tell a friend about the podcast. It definitely helps the show grow. And third, and most importantly, please support the incredible brands who make this podcast happen. They are Stanley, Elon Skis, Peter Glenn Ski and Sports, Outdoor Research, Best Day Brewing, and Club Med. Now, buckle up for a good one with Riley Poor. We scheduled this podcast like a week ago. When I reached out to you, you were like, yeah, we should get this done soon because I have a surgery next Friday, and I think it was a craniology or something like that, and I don't know what that is. What's being done, and why do you need the procedure in the first place?
Yeah, so it's a craniotomy, which is a brain surgery, and it's being done because I discovered that I have a golf ball sized tumor that I've been carrying around for probably a couple of years at this point.
Whoa.
And yeah, I hit my head in early June, falling out of my wheelchair, and had to go in for some imaging, and came out of that hospital stay with this new news. So had to kind of get on a different trajectory for a little while. I've been in and out of doctor's appointments and MRIs and all that pretty continually. And yeah, it's all happening in a couple days on Friday. So,
And you've had a ton of different medical procedures over your lifetime. Is this one scary for you, or is it more like I've been here before, I just got to get through it and move forward?
I'm not really nervous, to tell you the truth. I wouldn't say I've had a ton of medical stuff. I was pretty unscathed up until, I dislocated my neck just before my 26th birthday.
Yep.
And that's how I ended up in a wheelchair. And that was, a pretty long hospital stay there with the good people of Craig Hospital in Denver, Colorado. I was there for maybe 4 months doing some pretty intensive spinal cord injury rehab. And then, yeah, knock on wood, I've been pretty healthy since then. Haven't had any major complications or anything, but kind of left that experience with some heads up from the doctors that, having a neurological injury, if I had any sort of changes in that regard to my function or sensation, that I shouldn't sleep on it. I should get in and get re-imaged, because there's, a couple complications that can happen with spinal cord injuries where they put you back under the knife. So I kind of had that in my, I wouldn't say the back of my head, but had it as a potential reality. And I've had friends with spinal cord injuries go through those surgeries. So yeah, I kind of was able to take the news that I needed another pretty major neurological surgery with some grace, for sure. Not super stressed out about it. There's no one I'd rather cut me open than a neurosurgeon, so.
Well, I wish you the best. I think everybody wishes you the best on this surgery. We're not going to talk about medical shit again for about 45 minutes. And life for you, I think it starts in Whittingham, Vermont. I think there's also Wilmington, Vermont. You're probably in between there. But it's a tiny town that's famous for being the birthplace of Joseph Smith, the Mormon guy. And while you moved young, do you claim Colorado or New England sports teams as your own, or do you not care about that shit?
I'm not too attached to it. I moved to Crested Butte, Colorado when I was in third grade, and the Colorado Rockies had their inaugural season shortly thereafter, and then the Avalanche came to Colorado, and used to go see Broncos games when, I'd visit my grandma in Denver and stuff. So I'd say I'm more of a Colorado sports fan in general.
Okay. And you come from a ski family. Your mom's from Colorado. Your dad was a ski racer. There's a story about you loving skiing so much as a kid that your mom would wake up and she'd go to get you ready to go ski, and she wouldn't be able to find you in the house, and it would be because you were out in the family car ready to go skiing. While a lot of people are passionate about skiing, was it almost another level for you from day one?
Yeah, I just really just enjoyed, the momentum of it as a little kid. I grew up skiing at this teeny little ski resort by Mount Snow, Vermont, called Haystack. And my family was involved in the race program there. My dad was a coach, and my mom was the race secretary that would keep track of all the ongoings with the race team and the timing at the races and stuff like that. So just grew up in the little race shack around, a bunch of kids that like to try and go fast on skis. And I just kind of fell right into it. And I liked all the gear. My dad owned a bike shop and was one of the first Oakley dealers back there. Yeah, I had these cool Oakley goggles that I loved, and just liked getting suited up and getting out there.
And you're young. You moved when you were 7 years old, but you remember this time, it seems like. And when you think about it, your family's involved in ski racing. Vermont is probably the best place to grow up a ski racer based on conditions and racing in the country. But when do you start ski racing? Is it like 5 years old?
Probably. Yeah, pretty sure they were letting us run gates as soon as we could. And it was, a small resort, small race program, just a family vibe. So, yeah, little kids were hanging out with big kids, and Missy Giove and Aaron McGovern were racing out of that program when I was just a little kid. So,
if you think back then, it's alcohol and weed.
yeah, not quite yet. I think that more came about in high school. And
Aaron doesn't drink anymore, and Missy has like an incredible story with a ton of weed in it where like helicopters eventually found her, and I would love to get her on the podcast. What a story.
oh, yeah, she's a good story for sure.
Did your dad keep in touch with her?
No, not really. My dad did work with Norba for a long time, designing their downhill race courses for years. So they were in touch during that time frame. But when she moved on to cross country weed dealing, they weren't that much in touch.
Okay. And when you're younger, I mean, you wanted to be part of the U.S. ski team and on the Olympic team as like a young kid. Like there's a memory in your head of being young doing that. Is that correct?
Oh, yeah. I mean, that was before extreme skiing or free skiing was really a thing. So as a skier, the U.S. ski team was kind of the gold standard. And watching the Olympics back then with Alberto Tomba, he was the rock star standard for skiers. And yeah, that was kind of the place I saw myself wanting to get to.
He sold a ton of 4S Kevlars back then. It was crazy how many people had those skis. But the cool thing with you is it wasn't just ski racing because your dad was an early adopter of technology. So he had a VHS and a copy of Blizzard of Oz. Can you describe the impact that movie had on you? Because this is also like 7, 8 years old when you're watching Blizzard and you just watch that hundreds of times and are like mesmerized by Plake and Schmidt.
Yeah, I remember more than the film, like moments of the film. I had the Plake poster with his mohawk up, the Oakley poster, in my room on the ceiling. And, I fell in love with just the rock stars of any of those kind of momentum gravity sports at the time. So that was more of my memory was like my posters of that time.
Okay.
The first ski movie that I really latched onto was more when I moved to Crested Butte and saw Soul Sessions and Epic Impressions from the Matchstick dudes in the early 90s.
So that's like when you're 10 years old because you end up, I mean, this probably ends up hurting your ski race career in the long run because your family moves to Crested Butte in like 1990. You're 7 years old. First, why do they move? And what do you remember of the shock of the big mountains compared to what you were used to?
We moved because we had some really good friends, the Velarde family that moved out to Crested Butte, and we kind of followed. And yeah, the mountains out there were definitely a lot different. The snow was a lot different. I think the most powder I'd ever skied in Vermont was maybe 2 inches off the side of a groomed run. And
Right.
it was pretty consistently 300 plus inches of snow a year there in Crested Butte. So it was a totally different world living in the snow globe of the Rocky Mountains.
And you come from a small town and you're moving to a small town in Crested Butte. But when you get there, was it full on like hippie and ski bum vibe at that point in time?
Yeah, I mean, the whole town definitely revolved around skiing and partying. And yeah, it was a lot of counterculture type individuals that had moved up there in the 60s, 70s to kind of live the ski bum life. And by that time, they had kids that were, my peers. So yeah, it was the right place to be for the ski culture for sure. And I just love that and still really appreciative of my parents making that move because it changed the trajectory of my entire life.
And I think the first thing that you find out is so cool about living in Crested Butte is what Wednesdays became to you in school. And what was a Wednesday like for an elementary school kid in Crested Butte?
Privileged.
Well, I think a lot of people in ski towns are privileged, but what did you guys get to do?
Well, we got to break half day and go skiing, and we had different groups kind of according to our skill level. And the kids who were the kind of better skiers got to do a little program called Junior Ski Patrol, where we would go kind of get mentorship from the ski patrollers and get to hang out in their shack and learn about throwing explosive charges, different avalanche control, and doing on mountain rescues and medical stuff. And then we also would get to sweep the mountain with them at the end of the day. So we'd get to stay up until the mountain closed at 4 and then cruise around with them and call out to, see if anyone was stuck in the woods.
That's got to be the coolest thing for a kid that age, to be able to do that with the patrollers, and it probably sucks you into the lifestyle even more. And when you think about that group of junior patrollers that you were with, I'm sure you still know some of them to this day. Did a lot of them end up in the ski industry? Because I think that just getting on that path early would make you want to stay in snow forever.
Not so many necessarily in the ski industry. Definitely a few of the kids I ski raced with are currently working in the ski industry or outdoor industry. But yeah, all of them definitely loved snow. And we lived in a town where you kind of had to choose basketball or skiing. And a lot of the kids that kind of went the ski route. And those were some of my closest friends that I ended up getting to travel with through ski racing and later a couple of years skiing moguls. And yeah, everybody I grew up with, I think definitely still loves being in the mountains.
When you think about racing in Crested Butte, were you part of the race team for a while? And how far are you able to take that before you realize exactly what's going on with the whole extreme movement in the early 90s and you kind of focus on the exposure and terrain in Crested Butte compared to going fast?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't stick with ski racing nearly long enough to pursue the dream of making the US team or anything like that. I got out of it when I was maybe like a J4, I think. But, coming from New England, I could lay a turn down on ice, and that was a big benefit to my short, young ski racing career.
Right.
And I was also a big kid, so I outweighed most of my peers and could carry a lot more momentum down the hill. So I had a little hot streak going for a little while when I was young. And then, yeah, I mean, I can remember it like yesterday when I kind of decided I was over it. I had, through the early Matchstick movies, been introduced to who Seth Morrison was and his fluorescent bright hair. And he was pretty easy to pick out amongst the crowd in Crested Butte. And one day, the Silver Queen chair would go right over the T-bar where we would train gates. And he was on the lift with, a couple of his buddies. And one of them yelled out, like, "Go ski the mountain," or something like that. And I was just kind of like, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. So the next year I joined up with the freestyle program rather than racing because they, yeah, just did a lot more free skiing. And then I loved watching ski racing in the Olympics and stuff because it was, Tommy Moe, Peekaboo Street era.
Yeah.
But was kind of over it as far as my own passion.
So Seth inadvertently helps you quit ski racing and go to the freestyle team. And in thinking about that, are you heading up to Vail for the US Opens and all the shit that's going on around that? And are you in the terrain parks as well? Do they even have them in Crested Butte at that point?
A little later, I mean, this is right at the beginning of that whole evolution. The first couple years at a terrain park at Crested Butte, it was like a snowboard terrain park. And if you were going to poach it, you were risking your pass. And, snowboarders were going to be chucking snowballs at you the whole way down. And if you didn't have a 360 or a backflip for the jumps, like you were going to get called out pretty hard. So we would get in there, but it was not in a way where you could just get any sort of reps, and really build that skill set. But at that time, extreme skiing was more the hot new thing. And Crested Butte always had the U.S. National Extreme Skiing Championships. So getting to cut school and go up and watch that event over the course of a week was pretty much the highlight of what I was interested in at the time. And then, yeah, later, as soon as stuff like the US Open started going on, I had kind of fallen in with some friends that were a generation older than I was and was, yeah, hitching a ride over there to take part in the skier crosses and stuff like that. And that's how I kind of met a lot of the kids I ended up working with later on in life.
And I mean, just thinking about you being in Crested Butte and quitting the race program, I mean, you've got famous locals there. There's Seth, there's Scotty Ewing. Do you guys chase those guys around the mountain, and do they tolerate you, or are you annoying them, or what happens around that? Because I'm guessing that you're going to follow Seth if you can.
Oh, yeah, I mean, try.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he was kind of a beacon for sure. And the closer you could get to him, the more special it felt in a way. But the skiers who kind of really opened the door for me was Dave Swanwick and Allison Gannett. They were coming off of a year where they both were the world extreme ski champions up in Alaska. And through that junior ski patrol program, we got to ski one day with them. And they kind of knew my mom because she was a yoga teacher in town, and somehow, got my number. And I got home one day shortly after skiing with them, and Allison had left me a message to call them. And so I did, and they were like, "We're putting together a development team. Do you want to be on it?" And I was 15 years old at the time, so getting sponsored was very front of mind. And yeah, they put me on this Dina Starr, Look Lang, Kurma. I think Smith was one of the sponsors as well. Kind of all their common sponsors. And got me, hooked up as a young kid. Momentum was definitely going at that point. I was pretty focused on making that my future.
Now it's time for my first sponsor break, and I'm so stoked to have Club Med sponsor the podcast. And while some of you may be thinking, Club Med, isn't that for the best island vacations? Yes, while they offer the all-inclusive luxury experience in the islands, they're the only all-inclusive brand to offer mountain resorts globally. That's right, you can ditch the hassle of planning your ski vacation of a lifetime on your own and do it the Club Med way, and book one of their trips to the snowy peaks of Europe, Japan, China, or Canada. When you travel with Club Med, you'll enjoy unlimited lift tickets, lessons for all levels, delicious meals, and endless après ski fun, all included in the price. And while your kids are having a blast at the supervised children's clubs, you can focus on mastering your skiing or après skills and creating unforgettable memories. To make it all happen for you or your family, visit clubmed.us or call 1-800-CLUB-MED or your travel advisor to experience ski without limits. Next up, it's Elan Skis. And while I've been talking about Elan all summer, I've been keeping some information from you that I'll share today. The award-winning ski that started Elan's cult following here in the US, the Ripstick, is brand new for 24-25. Think all new molds, all new sizes, new widths, and new tech. I got to ski these skis last season, and I'll say, the new models are still lightweight, they still have a ton of pop, and they'll still make you a better skier. But these new skis are even more stable at speed, which will allow them to handle burlier terrain than ever before. While you get more out of the Ripstick collection, Elan was able to build them without making them more demanding. So Ripstick fits even more skiers than before. While I loved my original Ripstick, what I skied last year was noticeably more fun, and I know the cult of Elan is going to grow even more with this new collection. If you're a person that demo skis and you haven't tried an Elan yet, make sure you try one this year and you'll feel how fun these skis are. To find out more about all things Elan, head on over to elanskis.com. My final sponsor this round is Peter Glenn Ski & Sports, and they are your one-stop shop for getting out on the mountains, out on the water, out on the trail, and beyond. And they've been doing it for over 65 years. Peter Glenn doesn't make their own branded products that compete with established brands. They aren't trying to get you to stay in a hotel or go on a vacation. Peter Glenn is all about making sure that you have the best time possible outdoors. And they do that by having all the brands, all the products, and all the deals, both in-store and online. It's not about algorithms or AI. Peter Glenn is all about having the most knowledgeable staff who help you get what you need to get after it. So if you ski, snowboard, inline skate, wakeboard, water ski, or need outerwear for your adventure, Peter Glenn has all the answers. And they offer free shipping on orders over $50, a hassle-free return policy, and they'll price match reputable dealers. So please support this podcast and buy your stuff over at peterglenn.com. Those are my sponsors. Now let's jump back into the podcast. When you're 15 years old and the World Extreme Champions personally recruit you to their sponsored team, development team, it's got to be awesome. I mean, you're getting all this free product and you've got to be pretty stoked and you have these pro skier dreams. Does any of that shit get to your head? Like, were you ever like the cocky kind of badass little skier dude that maybe Tanner was when he was 14, 15 years old that wasn't going to take any shit from anybody? Like, who were you in your Grom days like that?
God, probably better to ask some of my friends how cocky I was, but I definitely thought I was cool. Started bleaching my hair and wearing Smith sliders with pink lenses in them and just emulating, whatever I would see in Freeze magazine, which was just coming out around that time, and Boards in Motion, which is, Kent Kreitler's magazine.
Yeah.
And whatever I could glean out of those pages and the films coming out from Matchstick and TGR and even the snowboard flicks, Standard and Hatchets and Mac Dogs films and stuff like that was just exactly who I was trying to emulate, so more than cocky, I was probably more of a poser.
I doubt it's poser when you're getting free stuff like that and you're living in Crested Butte. You're mature beyond your years and you're a big kid. I'm sure you looked like the 20-year-old kid who was like 15 years old. I think that really helped you out with getting your foot in the door with Matchstick because they're right down the street from your house or something like that. And for your high school, you need to do an internship to graduate or a few internships to graduate. And it's not like you went to Matchstick and they had signed you up for an internship and you went to work. It was kind of like you just would show up there every day and be like, hey guys, how's it going? What can I do? Was that kind of how you got your foot in the door? Like you actually physically put your foot through the door to get yourself in?
That's some good research, Mike.
Well, thank you.
That's exactly how it happened. No, we got through our school the opportunity to do internships in high school for credit. And yeah, I knew exactly where I was going. And at the time, Matchstick was based out of our good buddy Noah White's TV station, RSN network TV station there in Crested Butte, CBTV. And he had the computer system and the editing software that Matchstick was cutting their films on. And yeah, I knew where their office was, and I marched right in there and did whatever I could to make myself useful. And I mean, I'm probably annoyed the shit out of them, but they also let me stick around, so it worked out good.
I mean, how long do you have to spend annoying the shit out of them before they're like, hey man, we got an internship with you. Just come in when you're scheduled.
It was pretty immediate.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the first thing I did for them was organizing their shelves of camera gear and dusting equipment and stuff like that, and just try to make myself useful. And they were doing a bunch of shipping of their ski films in the fall and stuff like that. So there was always a big press to get in and get that work done, which evolved into more of my job when I started working for them more officially, getting paid to work for them later on. But yeah, I kind of designed my way out of high school early because I realized I could get these extra credits through doing these internships, and was looking at what I needed to graduate. And the only class I needed 4 credits in was humanities. So I took a correspondence course to get an extra half credit, and then had enough credits to graduate high school like a semester early.
And I'm going to cut you off because we're getting a little ahead, and I'll tee you up to tell that story in a minute. But first, when I was thinking about you being big for your age, because everybody said that, it was like you were a man-child when you were younger, and you looked way older than you were. And Rory Bushfield mentioned something to me about calling you Shreck. And whenever I think of Shreck, I think of a big dude, so I'm guessing this has to do with your size. But he said there was a story around not having a tool or something like that, and it was really funny, and I should ask you about it.
Yeah, I mean, that nickname came much later.
Yeah.
But yeah, we had snowmobiles. We were out at Smiley Creek Lodge in Idaho with Eric Pollard and Aaron, his wife, Justin Wiegand, and Bushy. And I think it was Rory's snowmobile. He like hit a rock and bent the A-arm on his snowmobile. And we had it in the shop that night trying to fix it. And I was able to bend it back with a vise and my brute strength. And at the time, we were getting our lunch out of the little Smiley Creek store there. and they had these like tuna fish cracker snacks that had a Shreck marketing campaign on it. And so, yeah, Shreck snacks turned into me being Shreck, and the rest is history.
All right. So that's a good story. And I guess that has to do with size and strength. But in the town that you grew up in, you were witnessing the birth of different parts of ski culture. Because like you said, in 93 is when Matchstick starts, and you're right there for that. You're there for the first extremes there. So you're exposed to a lot of things that are happening right there in ski culture. But the other things that you're exposed to are things that happen in ski towns that aren't normal for most kids to see. And like, do you end up places when you're just a teenager where you see like powdered drugs and shit that most kids won't be around until later in life? And how do you navigate that space as a young kid in a ski town?
Oh, I don't know, try and fit in, I guess. But yeah, I mean, I was hanging out with a crowd that was a generation older than me, and I was smoking weed at a young age with no influence of theirs.
Yeah, it's a ski town shit, right? You just smoke weed.
Yeah, smoke weed on the mountain, on the chairlift and stuff with your little buddies. And I think I did, kind of appear older than I was. So sometimes would get the invite to a bachelor party or something like that. And no one really gave me too much heat for hanging out with the older kids.
Okay. And then back to MSP. Was your senior year the year of the helicopter accident in Chile?
No, that would have been before. I think that was 97 that Steve and Seth were in that accident.
So that's like your freshman or sophomore year?
I think so, yeah.
Okay. And the pilot and T.R. Youngstrom die, and Seth and Steve are injured. Steve comes back in a wheelchair. And is that the first time you really saw the reality of what can happen in the mountains?
Pretty much, man. Yeah, that was a big eye-opener for sure.
And you're like his right-hand man, right? Like you're his assistant and intern, so like you're actually seeing all the things he's going through?
Not before that, as much as after that.
Sure.
And post-accident, Steve, was really focused on the films and the editing side of the films. And they had moved into their own office at this point and had their own setup for putting the films together and whatnot. And a big highlight of that process was getting these new tapes in from the field, these big old beta tapes. And when they would come into the office, Steve would go watch them, an hour long of just 16 millimeter ski footage with no audio. And I would, if I could, sit on the couch and watch them with him.
So that's like a dream for you.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I get to see everything going on in the mountains, not just the highlights that make it into the film. And again, yeah, I was trying to make myself useful in whatever ways I could. But yeah, Steve was in a wheelchair for maybe a year or a little longer, and then on a journey to walking. And he gets around really good now and plays a lot of golf and stuff. So I kind of got to see the beginning of his journey as a paraplegic, and it was pretty inspiring. I mean, I think if you mentioned my kind of mindset earlier, I think I got a lot of that from Steve. He definitely did not play the victim to his circumstances. He got on with life and got on with what he was passionate about, and brought a lot of good people around him in the process. And that was really inspiring to me to see, and leaned into that later on in life when I found myself in a wheelchair.
Yeah. And I'll say your Matchstick internship credits help you graduate early, which you kind of mentioned. And being that you saw a path to like pro skierdom and you had like a sponsor and everything like that, was there ever a thought of being a pro skier would be your future? And what changes that thought?
I mean, I wanted that more than anything. Once I kind of had met Seth and a couple of the other Matchstick guys, Shane, and yeah, one memory I'll share with you. So Matchstick would always do their fall movie premiere in Crested Butte. They would have, raffles and stuff like that. And I, one year, won a cat skiing trip at Irwin Lodge for 2 people. And I chose to use that coupon when I knew the Matchstick guys were going to be up there filming with McConkey and some of the crew. And so I just placed myself in the cat with him. And, that's like first time I spent a good amount of time with Greg Strokes. And at that time, I was ready to market myself as a young professional skier. So wasn't afraid to write sponsor me letters and stuff like that, and ended up with the support of K2 and Oakley and Sessions. And yeah, I think that was definitely what I wanted to do with life. And then I met this young kid named Tanner Hall and watched him do a D-spin 900 and realized, shit, maybe I should find a different way to pursue this dream. And having been introduced to the whole filmmaking side of things, I kind of went down that road, pursued being a cinematographer.
Was there a knee injury for you too in there?
That's crazy to know that. Yeah, I tweaked my knee
Playing soccer in the fall.
playing soccer. Yep, tore my meniscus. And yeah, that was the first winter that I went into with a snowboard because I was not able to really ski that well. Yeah, so I felt like I was losing ground to my peers pretty quickly. JT Holmes had been in a Matchstick movie at age 17 at that point. Yeah, Tanner, CR, all those guys were breaking onto the scene and becoming visible very quickly. The new Canadian Air Force.
Everything was changing then.
Everything was changing really fast. And I knew while I could ski challenging terrain, I was not as talented in the air awareness side of things.
Not too many huge dudes throwing 900s.
No. Couple though.
But for you, film school was an option, but you decided to go to MSPU, which is Matchstick Productions University, because Murray and Steve offer you the opportunity of a lifetime. What was their pitch?
I don't know if I'd call it a pitch. I mean, I was trying to figure out if I was going to go to college, and the only school I was really interested was Brooks Film School in Santa Barbara. And I had a friend of ours was actually going to school there, and I talked to him about it, and he was like, well, I'll tell you the truth, man. If you've got the opportunity to work for Matchstick, like that's what people graduating with me are going to be killing for that opportunity. And at the time, I'd started to kind of feel out what it might take to work for Matchstick, and they had kind of introduced me to their film cameras through being an assistant cameraman on shoots and helping out lug gear for winter and stuff like that. And I had some money left to me from my grandparents, and it was for college, but I convinced my parents that I should spend it on a 16 millimeter film camera. And one day got Winter to line me up on what camera to buy and what lenses, and yeah, ended up blowing it all in one day and became a cinematographer for Matchstick.
So these guys are going to teach you the ropes, and they're the best in the business. Them, TGR, Johnny, they're all in the same kind of wheelhouse of what they're doing. But this is like the biggest time ever for Matchstick. I mean, if you get a job with Matchstick in 2001, because I believe that's when you graduated high school, does that mean that you're filming for the ski movie series?
Yep. The first film that I had shots in was The Frontline, Ski Movie 3. But yeah, I mean, they were blowing up. I'd helped out as much as I could, wherever I could, on the few films leading up to that. And, they were winning the Ski Movie of the Year at the Powder Awards. They had all the hottest shit athletes on the roster. And I imagine probably the biggest budget in the game at that point. So it was the place to be for sure.
I mean, it's so crazy because you get your dream job at 18, and the next thing you know, you're skiing in Alaska and who knows where else, and there's so many different perks. But at this point in life, like, money's not important. You're just stoked to have this job. But I'm just thinking, as like a 18-year-old kid who gets hired out of high school, what do you make working for MSP? Are you making like 20 grand a year and just so stoked on that?
Yeah, I think I was making like $1,250 a month.
And you were fired up, right?
Yeah, I mean, it paid for my truck and my snowmobile and had enough cash to pay off my credit card, which was a needed thing to be traveling, and yeah, I had everything I needed and more at that point.
And do you get to film with Shane McConkey? And what's your best McConkey story?
I didn't actually film with McConkey very much because guys like Shane and Seth were the A team and usually had a lot of their filming was done out of helicopters. There's not a lot of seats in a helicopter. So they were usually defaulting to the cinematographers that were most likely to not fuck up the shots. But I did get to spend a lot of time with those guys, luckily. And I think my favorite Shane story was we were in Aspen one year for the meeting, and he was just going to go meet this guy outside of Grand Junction at this cliff to go base jumping. And it was just some random person that he'd met through the base jumping community. And so I ended up driving him down there to go meet this guy and watching him jump and then, cruising back with him. And it was just like spending time with somebody you look up to that much in that one-on-one capacity was definitely something I always cherish and remember about McConkey because, a lot of the time that I got to hang out with him, it wasn't one-on-one necessarily,
Yeah, and it's funny because, a lot of people will say that you don't ever want to meet your heroes because it can spoil them. But I had the opportunity to spend some time with McConkey as well. And when you're with a dude like that, there is no ruining. It only enhances his legacy when you were able to spend time with him and realize how funny and cool he was in person and none of it was an act.
Oh my God, he was so fucking funny.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was a goofball. I think that saying does not really apply to my experience. I've always had a great time meeting my heroes and still do in a lot of ways. And I think the people I looked up to in that era and even before that are just good people, I got really lucky to have role models that were positive role models and not assholes, I guess.
It's time for my second round of sponsors, and I'm going to start with Outdoor Research. While I love that they sponsor my podcast, I've been wearing OR gear since I moved to Seattle in 2000. I started with one of their rain jackets, as if you live in Seattle and don't own one, you're doing things wrong. And based on how amazing that jacket worked for me, Outdoor Research gear is the only outerwear I've bought with my own money. And I've been privileged over the years. I get a lot of free stuff, but I've still bought my gear from OR because it's the best. These days, while they've brought in new designers and the styles and the cuts have gotten cooler and more my style, one thing that won't change is the quality. That's the reason you see core skiers and snowboarders, climbers, and now mountain bikers swearing by OR. Because if you want the best, head on over to outdoorresearch.com to see what I'm talking about. Next up, it's Best Day Brewing. And if you're like me, you love having a cold one, but you don't have the time for the alcohol to slow you down. That's where Best Day comes in. Think all the flavor of your favorite beer, whether that be a Kolsch, a hazy IPA, a Mexican lager, the Shandy, or the brand new Pilsner, which is quickly becoming my favorite Best Day. And they come guilt-free, as Best Day has a fraction of the calories of your regular beer, they won't stop you from driving anywhere, and you won't be hungover in the morning. And for people who drink beer with alcohol, here is my secret trick to extending my night. Mix in a Best Day every couple drinks, and you'll find yourself to be more coherent, more fun, and primed to have your best day or night ever. Trust me, it definitely works. And to find out more about Best Day, head on over to bestdaybrewing.com or buy some on Amazon. My final sponsor this round is Stanley, and they've been supporting this podcast for years before they became the hottest brand in America. Why did I want to work with Stanley? Because Stanley's products are light years better than the competition. While everyone knows about their quencher, which is everywhere, I swear by their adventure stacking beer pint glasses, and I use them every day. And when ski season comes around, I use Stanley's food jars and lunch boxes and bring them to the mountain to save me from buying $25 burgers. It's the ultimate saving money hack at the mountain. And Stanley's the brand that invented the category of keeping things hot and cold, and they've been doing it for over 100 years, so you know you're getting the best when you buy a Stanley. To find out more about all their products and collections, head on over to stanley1913.com. Those are my sponsors. Now let's jump back into the podcast. Thinking about your relationship with Seth, another guy I had the opportunity to work with, and when I think about his relationship with me, I used to think we were friends, but the more I think about it, K2 paid him, and part of his job was to hang out with me, and he was always cool with me, the most professional athlete I worked with. He was really, really great. But I think about it now and I'm like, I wonder if he ever really liked me, if we were ever really friends, or it was just part of his job because he was so good at his job and he was able to turn off his job whenever he got away from the event. And he's able to be like, thank God that shit is over. I'm so tired of kissing babies. But with you and Seth, were you guys ever like really good friends? Like, did you guys consider each other friends and call each other and shit?
Yeah, I mean, I feel lucky in that sense. I feel like Seth kind of gets a bad rap. He's an awesome person.
Awesome. But I don't know if he ever really liked me, is what I'm saying. But I thought he was awesome.
Yeah,
He was like my favorite. I love traveling with him.
he probably did. He's got a hard shell sometimes, but you know, when I was first really idolizing Seth in Crested Butte, we actually lived pretty close to each other and we worked out at the same gym in town. And this is when he drove the big white Cadillac, you know.
Yep.
I was young, so I was hitchhiking into town to go to the gym and he would pick me up and we'd go, you know, spend some time at the gym, drive home together, and then that kind of turned into actually going together or whatever. And I just feel really fortunate to have known Seth when I did and in the capacity I did. I think he might not admit it, but we're buddies. No, I'm just kidding.
Well, I think everybody has to say that. Anybody I talk to and ask me about it, like, yeah, man, he's so awesome, but I don't know if he liked me. But whatever. I know you did a lot of time with Rory Bushfield too, and when I think of Bushy, I think he's the closest thing to the spirit of McConkey in skiing these days, and that's just my opinion, but I just love the way that that guy lives. And when there's people like that, there's always great stories around him. What's your best Bushy story?
So, okay, here's a good Bushy story. We went to Austria, St. Anton one year. It was me and Rory and Crispin Shetler, Andy Mayer, John McMurray, and Flip McCrarick. And we were kind of dealing with veritable snow conditions. And those guys decided, since the snow wasn't great, that they were going to hop in this Audi that Flip had rented and drive to Italy. And this was the time when Bushy and McMurray would just jump off of anything they possibly could. So John had jumped off a bridge in Venice onto the top of a like tourist boat, and they pretty immediately pulled the boat over, and John ended up getting arrested and carted off to somewhere that they, you know, Flip and Rory were just kind of watching this. Rory was probably filming him, and they lost him to the police in Venice. And so they had to go hunt around and find out where he was, spring him out of jail. And then they came back up to Austria and they had in tote with them these pellet guns that shot these little plastic BBs, but they looked like real 9mm. So I'm like sleeping in our hotel room, and next thing I know, the big window that, you know, kind of went out onto this patio is like sliding open, and Rory's coming in his big old Oakley one-piece suit with this mask on and this gun, and just lights me up, starts shooting me with this pellet gun. And I was, you know, just waking up like, what is going on? Like, it was probably one of the scarier moments that I've had, just as far as not knowing what the hell is going on.
A dude shooting you when you woke up? Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't know. Am I getting robbed? Am I really getting shot here? Like, what the hell is going on? Because it hurt. Yeah, I had to kind of assess, make sure I wasn't bleeding, and then it was all about retribution from there on out.
Do you remember what you did back, or does it get lost in the shuffle?
Oh, those guns were heated topic of the rest of the trip. We were just shooting each other with them wherever we could, and I think I had to confiscate them from Rory and then mounted my own surprise attack on him. But no one was coming out a winner in that situation. We're just lucky we didn't lose an eye.
Yeah, totally. Well, back to working with MSP, shooting film was super expensive back then, and you didn't get the shots back right away. So it was all like you're shooting, and then Murray and Steve are hoping that all your shots are going to come back. And when you think about it, when you're in the editing room and the tape comes back and the heavy hitters of MSP are watching your footage and they see your shots for the first time. Is that a nerve-wracking thing for you? Like, are you worried that they're either going to lay into you or be stoked on you, or what's that feeling like?
Yeah, I mean, that was definitely a part of it. It was, $100 for 3 minutes of film back then. So it was no joke. And they were paying for the film to go through my camera. And, the first thing I shot was Jay Quinlan jumping over this huge dam spillway in Crested Butte. So it was something you don't want to miss. And I got really lucky. I mean, those guys were just really great teachers and mentors. I think part of it was probably because they understood on a different level than I did how expensive having an apprentice was going to be in that sense. But they really went out of their way to make sure I was not fucking up footage and getting my focus and my aperture understanding on point. And yeah, I don't remember fucking anything up too bad, but I mean, they might.
You have this dream job with your hometown company, and you've met everybody in the industry through them. You've made amazing movies. Things are great. Why leave Matchstick?
Well, that came on a little later. I think that was 2007.
Mm-hmm.
I had been going up to Squamish, Whistler, and kind of being on assignment up there through the winter for a couple seasons. And through that, I was really kind of turning into more of a producer responsible for not just showing up on a shoot and turning on a camera, but actually making the shoots happen.
Yep.
And, I had met a really good group of people in both skiing and snowboard industry at that point, and was starting to kind of focus on what I wanted my career to look like beyond just being a cinematographer. And yeah, I was thinking about it a lot. And we had, just this, I wouldn't say it was like falling out necessarily. We decided to go our separate ways. And I, at the time, had been entertaining some other opportunities that I could make a little bit more money at and would give me a little bit more freedom to do some producing and directing. And I think, at the time I was young, it was my dream job. I also kind of felt like I'm never going to graduate out of this intern role with these guys.
Sure.
And yeah, it was a tough moment, but, it all ended up working out for the best, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing immediately was like producing content for Red Bull. And I think the idea is they have deeper pockets. You can produce stuff there and shoot stuff. And was Simon's 2-year movie project, was that like the first thing that they signed you on for, Transitions?
No. So the first thing I did was I shot with Standard Films.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So yeah, I finished out that winter of 2007 shooting with John and Eric Jackson and Kazu. And, we were doing a lot of snowmobile access backcountry stuff. So that was kind of my specialty at the time and what I really enjoyed doing.
It's funny that they wouldn't get a snowboarder to do that shit, but whatever.
Yeah, shout out to Travis Robb, who got my foot in the door for that opportunity, who I had linked up with through the mountain bike films that Derek Westerlund was making, the Freeride Entertainment New World Disorder series. I would work on those films, as would a lot of the Matchstick crew in the summers, and met Travis Robb, who's longtime Standard Films cinematographer, really amazing guy that had his finger on the pulse of the snowboard industry, and he kind of opened that door of opportunity for me. Then I got the opportunity to work with Red Bull through this Backcountry Bombshells TV show thing that they did, which was a pretty amazing trip. We got to go to 4 backcountry ski lodges in British Columbia over a couple-week period. And yeah, I mean, once you make a little bit of that Red Bull money, it's hard to want to go back. So the end of that season, I worked with Tanner and CP on a shoot out at the Rutherford Hip up in Whistler. And yeah, came out of that whole season, not really wanting to go back to Crested Butte where, Matchstick had been life there for a lot of years for me at that point, and ended up moving in with Tanner out in Park City. And we were exploring working together with CP on his next film. He had just come out with Believe at that point.
Yep.
And I think CP, he kind of needed more of a cameraman. And again, I was trying to get into a little bit more of producing and directing stuff. So that was kind of iffy on whether or not that was going to be a good match. And ran into Michael Spencer in Park City at Starbucks, I think. And he was like, "What are you doing?" And I got a budget that I'm putting together to do a film project with Simon. Do you want to do it? And yeah, that's how Transitions came about.
What's crazy to me is it looks like at the same time that you're signing on to do Transitions, you're also signing on with Nike 6.0 as the ski team manager. It's like the holy grail of ski jobs, I would think. How do you end up landing this one?
Got to give shout out to Sammy Carlson for that connection. He was the only skier on the Nike program at that point, and they pretty much straight up asked him, "Who do you want to be your team manager?" And Sammy and I had spent some good quality time for, a few years before that. He was like a little brother to me, and yeah, he put my name in the hat, and it worked out.
And when you think about it, you went from making pennies at Matchstick to having two jobs with two of the biggest brands in sports. I mean, you've got Red Bull that you're working on the Transitions project. You've got Nike 6.0. I mean, are you in-house with Nike? Is it like now you're killing it and you have benefits?
No, not in-house at that point.
Okay.
Yeah, they had hired a bunch of team managers for the different sports. They had Jason Kenworthy in surfing, and Barrett Christie in snowboarding, and Silas Thurman and wake skate and stuff, Mark Losey and BMX. It was really smart, actually, what they did. They didn't have enough resources to put people on staff, but Curtis Graham, shout out to Curtis, he could sign as many athletes as he wanted, and he's the head of the sports marketing program there. So he just signed us on as athletes on his roster.
Huh.
And pretty much all the team managers that he signed up had a camera, either photographers or filmers, So we were kind of immediately out there doing double duty for him. So it was cool how that all came together.
And what's the most rock star thing that you were able to do with Nike money? When you think about like a tour or something you planned with the team, they had deeper pockets than anybody and they would spend a shit ton until they decided to pull out of the sports. And what were you able to achieve with them that you're like, man, I can't believe we pulled that shit off?
It was a cool time to be there. Fast forward a couple of years, I did go in-house there in 2009, and that was shortly after the iconic P-Rod commercial came out. So they obviously had resources, and we did all sorts of crazy stuff there. I mean, when I first came in, they had a BMX show on Fuel TV. They were taking over the U.S. Open of surfing and that whole webcast, and doing a bunch of different surf events. And they were dabbling in the kind of like media side of action sports. So that was cool to kind of open up the spectrum of what we were getting involved in. And we did a TV commercial one year for the Super Bowl.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, so that was big.
Did you get to shoot part of that too?
No, at that time I was in a wheelchair.
Okay, yeah, that's right.
So I was kind of at the office, the guy in that group that knew what to do with footage on the technical side, but also kind of how to interface with the different creatives that were out there in the field getting it done. But, answer your question, I think the coolest project that I ever got to do with them was definitely the Never Not film.
The snowboard film that you got to do?
Yeah.
And that's later on. Here's where we're going to get to later on, because here's where our story's going to change a little bit. And it's almost like a bad after-school special in ways, but the way that you've responded to it is not like that at all. You were at a party after Dew Tour in 2009. you're on the second floor or an elevated bit or something like that, and there's a pool that opens up later on. People start getting pushed in the pool, but jumping off shit is what you do. I mean, that's just what you've done your whole life. And I think you're trying to do like a simple gainer or something like that. And what happened when you jumped?
Yeah, so I mean, we were all roughhousing and people were getting thrown in this pool. And yeah, it just kind of became evident that we were going to go. And eventually, so yeah, just jumping into the pool didn't go right and just barely grazed my head on the bottom of the pool and dislocated my neck at C5-6 and immediately became a quadriplegic and yeah, kind of floated up and was doing my best not to drown and got flipped over and dunked again and, got another breath of air and then kind of floated up face down again. And my buddy, Jake Largess, shout out to Jake, he saved my life. He saw that something wasn't right, flipped me over, and I was able to explain what was going on because at the time I was actually an EMT. I had taken my training because I wanted to, have some idea of what was going on in case I ran into friends that were hurt in this profession that I was in, which is quite dangerous.
Yeah.
And knew people that had been in wheelchairs and yeah, just kind of knew the deal and knew that I had put myself in that situation immediately.
You don't knock yourself out at all. So you're conscious this whole time. And like, where's your pain level?
Yeah, I didn't knock myself out. I just barely grazed my head on the bottom of the pool as I was kind of finishing my rotation underwater. And yeah, I mean, there was actually, happen chance, a chiropractor that was there who jumped in the pool and did my C-spine support. So in the pool, pain wasn't so bad. It was more just, realizing that I was paralyzed and communicating that to people. And then when I got out of the pool and onto the backboard, when the paramedics came, was when it got really uncomfortable.
And do they get you into an ambulance, get you to the hospital, and are you put into emergency surgery like right away?
Yeah, I mean, I was demanding painkillers by the time, I got into the ambulance. And Luke Van Valen was with me on that ride to the hospital and went to a small hospital in Bennington, Vermont. And they sent me on from there to Albany, New York, because I needed to go into surgery. And yeah, I was pretty much medically induced coma essentially for days until I kind of came out of that.
When you come out of it and you come out of the fog and you kind of realize what's going on, do you have any feeling in any of your extremities at all? Or can you move your head or anything?
No, I mean, at that point, I was pretty pasted. Yeah, I couldn't really do much. I was super uncomfortable, just felt super hot, and, had all sorts of drugs on board and stuff. And yeah, it was kind of in and out of consciousness and just kind of a pretty weird time. And then I got flown out to Craig Hospital in Colorado a few weeks later after I kind of stabilized a bit. I had pneumonia from being, in the pool, and then it was snowing outside. It was a blizzard. So yeah, slow trip to the hospital, and
And so your lungs are like filling up?
yeah, my lungs were in bad shape. Like one of the things I remember from Albany was, waking up and all the crew was kind of like sitting in with me doing different shifts. And Simon was actually in the room with me. And I kind of woke up and looked at him. I was like, I'm drowning, and I was intubated and I'd been like kinking the tubes and trying to pull these tubes out of my mouth and stuff. So they were thinking about doing a trach for me. They were giving me like a Mucinex or something to like break up the mucus in my lungs. And I could just tell I had like water in my lungs basically. And so I like kind of woke up, sensed that I was essentially drowning, got Simon's attention. He went and got the docs and was like, he's saying he's drowning. And yeah, sure enough, my lungs were in really bad shape and ended up getting a trach put in and couldn't talk for, gosh, probably a month plus after that.
Thinking about all this, it would be totally understandable for you to be the victim here and ask, why me, and just be depressed and down. Did you ever have that mentality, or have you always been as positive as everybody made you sound?
Yeah, I mean, I never really felt the victim, honestly. Going to Craig Hospital was an interesting experience. I mean, it's all traumatic brain injury and spinal cord injury, and it's people from all different walks of life, and so there's people in there that got hit by a drunk driver or shot. And, I remember thinking pretty early on, like, this is something I kind of did to myself, like I'm the one who like jumped into this pool, and it's not something that was done to me in a way.
Yeah.
And I saw people going pretty deep into depression pretty quickly. And I just knew that wasn't a way that I could really operate and stand to really make the kind of recovery that I was focused on making. And so, yeah, I just never went there.
And I would think that there's two things that really drive you while you're in the hospital to keep moving forward. One is you've got a movie to finish making. I mean, given you can't use your hands at all, but you are going to make sure that you finish the Transitions movie, and that's driving you. But then also when you're in, I don't know if it was Craig or if you're in Albany or if you were in Vermont, but at one point the X Games are on TV. And can you describe how special that whole deal was for you, the whole X Games, seeing it?
Oh, yeah. I mean, that was definitely uplifting for sure. I think I was in Albany when the Powder Awards were actually going on.
Okay.
And God, it felt like every other person that would get up there would have some shout out to me, And I remember Seth getting up to accept an award and holding some space for me. And just, yeah, it was incredibly touching. I think I was in there watching it with my dad, and I just kind of felt everybody's energy coming my way. And then, yeah, I transferred out to Colorado shortly after that. And I just rocked Simon's world in a way, like he had just won that Dew Tour event in Vermont. And then that night I had my injury, and then he was due at the X Games a few days later. So it was a lot, and didn't want to slow him down at all and wanted to see him get out there. So I made sure to have my dad let him know, like, Riley wants you to go kill it, And then so we're watching the ski events, and all of a sudden everybody's got these Riley Poor stickers on their helmets, which Nike made and distributed throughout pretty much everybody in the X Games that year. So it was pretty uplifting for sure to see how much support I was getting out of that community.
Well, that's pretty amazing. And I was going to talk about you finishing Transitions, but then I looked at our time, so I'm not going to really talk about it other than saying that you do finish that movie, and it's awesome. And when you think about finishing a movie like that, do you get to go to the premiere?
That year, I did not. Yeah, so I got hurt in January 2009, out of the hospital in like early May. Went out to LA, lived with Tyler Hamlet and my girlfriend Katrina at the time, and kind of worked closely with Poor Boys, who had a lot of Simon's footage. Finished up that film in like September. That premiered at the IF3 festival. And I had just been offered the in-house job at Nike, so I was needing to get my shit together to move from LA to Oregon. And yeah, didn't make the premiere.
Well, I'll talk about some other things then. Before the injury, you're really confident. Some people said maybe a little cocky or who knows, but from what I found, life-altering injuries can really change a person. I mean, you talk to Roy Tuscany and he'll tell you he was a different person from before his injury and afterwards. I mean, CR, he was different from before and afterwards. Can you look back and see the ways that you changed after your injury, or have you always been the same dude and this is just unfortunate that it happened?
No, I'd say I definitely changed. I mean, it's super humbling event to go through, You gotta basically start over and reinvent yourself. And I felt very fortunate that I could still kind of play in the same world that I was a part of beforehand, because that wasn't the case for everybody that I was rehabbing around, It's
Yeah.
hard to go back to carpentry or something, right? So getting to continue on with that transitions project was a big trajectory setter for me. And, my therapy kind of became making that film, and, my ability to finish that film opened the door for me to, get my in-house job at Nike. And then, my focus kind of turned over to all those projects that worked on for the next, decade plus with that crew in the action sports division. And then, it just kind of one thing led to the next. And I definitely changed a lot throughout that process. It was a new chapter in life for sure.
And I mean, you have to go through a ton of different pain, both physical and emotional. I don't know, is there a way to describe what nerve pain is? And is it something that you still experience today, or does that eventually subside?
Yeah, I mean, nerve pain is gnarly. It basically, when it was at its worst, it felt like I was stuck in a bathtub of hot cement.
Huh.
And it was pretty inescapable. And it was not easy to deal with all the time. It did end up improving a lot, and your tolerance for pain goes up a lot when you have chronic pain.
Sure.
But I years later got introduced to hyperbaric oxygen, and that actually was the biggest game changer for my nerve pain.
And then there's emotional pain too. I mean, thinking of like coming to terms with the loss of what you love to do, being in the mountains and skiing and just being able to lose your mobility. I mean, how tough was it to come to terms with that?
Yeah, it was hard at times for sure. I just loved the sensation of skiing, snowboarding, downhill mountain biking, skateboarding. That was kind of like what I did with any time I had to be recreating. And when you don't have that stuff, you got to kind of find something else. And kind of strangely, I felt lucky that I had this corporate job that demanded a lot of me. And that's kind of where my energy went. And I just kind of reset my focus, and I guess kind of tried to put the stuff I was not able to do in the same capacity kind of out of sight, out of mind, and really, I was still the ski team manager for Nike for a bit, and then, helping them with their marketing efforts in skiing for a few years once I was in-house. And it was cool to stay connected, and the guys that I'd put on the team was still the team, TJ, Jossie, and Simon, Sammy, etc. So it was cool to still be involved in skiing, but I just didn't have the same passion to follow it in the ways that I did before.
And that's totally understandable. And being that you never stopped working throughout this journey is pretty admirable. But when I think about living and kind of replacing all the things that you used to like with something else, I mean, how long did it take for you to really enjoy living again and find something that could replace it, even though it's never going to be the same sensation?
Not all that long. I bought a house in end of 2011.
Good time to buy a house.
Yeah, great time to buy a house. And my godparents run a really awesome architecture firm out of Vermont, Line Sync Architecture, and they stepped up, and as did my dad, who is a really talented builder, and we turned this ranch house into a place that was really pretty comfortable place for someone in a wheelchair to live. And that was an experience that, becoming a homeowner in, a beautiful custom home and having a corporate job and all that, it just lit me up in a different way, kind of feeling like, oh, I'm not actually slowing down too much because of this. I'm kind of still succeeding and killing it in life.
I mean, all your jobs are better afterwards if you look at them on paper. So yes, you can say that you are succeeding in life for sure. And while you and I could talk about so many different things, at this point, I'm going to call it and say it's time for something that I'd call inappropriate questions. This is where I get someone that you know to ask 3 questions, and they can be anything. And I was able to get a guy that you've known since you were 7. Jamie Starr was part of your ski crew in Crested Butte. He was older and maybe faster, and eventually he made his way to the desks of the North Face and backcountry.com. but he's one of those genius marketing wizard guys who's also just a great person all around. And like everyone I talked about with you, he loves you so much. And he came up with 3 questions. And are you ready for question number 1?
Send it. I'm ready.
Riley, my brother. So I got a couple questions for you. First of all, lots of love to you. With the breadth and depth of your particular set of life experiences and the grace with which you've navigated all the challenges that have been thrown your way, I've come to think of you as an old wise sage in a lot of ways. But when I go way back into my memory bank, whether it was you coming in hot from Vermont to our backyard baseball game in Crested Butte, fresh out of the minivan, or the early ski team years, or your early Matchstick years, or times in Boulder, it dawns on me that you were quite the opposite back then. First question. When you were something like 12 years old, I seem to remember you having to hitchhike by yourself while on a trip with Boy Scout Troop 478. What in the world would cause that to happen?
Yeah, Janie's dad, Jim, and his brother, Brendan, Starr boys, all epic individuals. We were all Boy Scouts growing up in Crested Butte and had a Boy Scout river trip on the Colorado River where myself and Clark, who was one of our leaders on that trip, we ended up basically sinking our canoe under this island. And yeah, we got it freed up. I ended up in the canoe. Clark ended up on the island. I eventually had to bail out of the canoe and run across a cow field to a highway and hitchhike to where the river outage was. And yeah, pulled up in a car, got out all soaking wet, and everybody who was like taking the canoes out of the river was like, what the fuck is going on? And yeah, almost died, but that was a memorable trip for sure.
All right, Boy Scouts of America. I would say their motto, but I forget what it is. You probably know. What is it? It's like 2 words.
Trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, thrifty, brave, clean, reverent.
I mean, that's a whole lot more. I thought they had like be kind or be something or...
Oh, yeah, something like that. Be kind, do a good deed daily, something like that. I forget.
All right, well, let's go with question number 2.
You were a pretty impressionable kid from what I recall, especially when it came to emulating things you saw on the mountain and in action sports films. On that subject, maybe you can tell us how the skate video, Whiskey, influenced how you partied as a young teenager.
All right, well, it was a snowboard video, Whiskey, that influenced you, and I know that Jamie knows that because we talked about it, but how did that influence you as a young teenager?
Oh, God. Well, I was ready to send it as hard as anyone that I could kind of see. And yeah, definitely emulated some people who were not probably the smartest individuals. And yeah, one night we were partying and I did not realize that the bottles people were breaking over their head were probably prop bottles, and tried to whack myself in the head with a Jack Daniels bottle. And yeah, it didn't break.
Well, I think they might have been real bottles, but there was that one in the movie where it had like the dink on the dude's head, and it was just like, oh my God. And you did that to yourself with the Jack Daniels bottle? That's crazy, because a beer bottle will break on a head if you hit it hard enough, and a Jack Daniels bottle won't.
Yeah, if they were really breaking it, man, that's impressive. I feel like I gave it a good shot, but it did not break.
Well, Jack Daniels bottle compared to beer is totally different, so I can see that not breaking. I'm going to jump in. And actually, one more thing. When you think about your time, I mean, like, you were traveling the world with all kinds of athletes, and you say you like to send it. Were you the TM that could party with all your athletes as well? And like, you know, it could be a cloud of smoke, but you're still going to get shit out of everybody, and everybody still loves you and respects you as a person, but you can party with them too?
Definitely. I mean, I feel like that was part of the game. I don't think many people were getting roles as camera guys, photographers, team managers without that ability and their skill set.
I agree with you completely. So that's question number 2. We're going to jump into your final inappropriate question.
Riley, you got to tell us, what's worse, insurance companies or door-to-door solar salesmen?
Oh, man. Jamie's funny. What he's talking about is a current project I'm working on, doing some investigative reporting these days. And yeah, kind of in the depths of some white-collar crime being perpetrated by the good old boys of Brigham Young University. And stay tuned on that.
All right, so you grew up in the area where John Smith, or whatever that John Mormon guy's name was from, and now he's investigating white-collar crime with the Mormon Church, and he didn't say that, he said BYU, but I'm just going to tie that all back to John Smith or whoever he is. That's Inappropriate Questions, and that's our podcast. And like I told you in a text, I thought this was going to be a really heavy deal, as I didn't really know you personally. And if I did know you really well personally, I'd know that you're a super positive person and that this conversation would be awesome regardless. I could ask you any question. You'll give me the real answers, but it doesn't have to be heavy. And I feel like just in talking to you here, that like, if this injury could happen to anyone, like I'm not saying it's a blessing that it happened to you because that's terrible. I wish it wouldn't happen to anybody. But you're one of the few people that can handle this with grace where other people might lose their minds. I know I probably wouldn't do half as well as you did. And it's cool to kind of learn that firsthand on this podcast. And while I'm not a praying person, I'm going to be thinking positive thoughts for you on Friday. And I want to thank you today for sharing so much with me.
Thanks, dude. And I had one question for you, actually. I was wondering if when we met, was it at the K2 Back 9? Didn't you have something to do with organizing that event?
I did have something to do with it, and this is probably how we met. I was wondering if this would come up. We had a Back 9 party. I'm looking at the poster right now at the Garibaldi Lift Company in Whistler. It was something that we printed posters on ski top sheets for. So we planned for this months ahead of time, and we were selling tickets months ahead of time. And the tickets were printed on ski top sheet as well. So I think it was you and Frankie and a few other people had come to the Back 9 to try to get in, but you guys didn't have tickets. And the fire marshals in Whistler were like, hey, nobody else can come in here or you guys are fucked. And we didn't let you guys in. And I think I heard about that for like 5 years after it. Would that be what you were thinking about?
Potentially, but I did make it in there.
Okay, well, Frankie didn't, and I don't think he was too stoked on me.
Well, thanks for the exception. Yeah, I thought that's where we first crossed paths.
Yes, and that would have been also, I think, the first night I met Alex O'Brien. What a great time that was.
He's such a good dude. I love Alex.
Such a good dude. All right, man. Well, I thank you for your time. I'm going to hit you up for some images, or if you can send me some images over, that would be great. And yeah, man, I'm just going to wish you luck and think good thoughts for you.
Yeah, man. Congrats on almost 400 episodes. That's epic. You do a good thing, and I think a lot of people enjoy it and appreciate it. So keep on keeping on.
And I'm just thinking about this. I think I'm on 397 now. And then 398 will be at ABM. 399 will be Lindsay Jacobellis. And 400 will be you.
Oh, what an honor.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
That's awesome.
And it's cool that you said that too. Yeah. So you're my 400th episode.
Well, good job, dude. Appreciate your time.
Thank you very much. It's 8 years in the making. We got it done.
Hell yeah, man. We did.
So that was time with Riley Poor. And in the ski business, if you're a kid coming up and you're not going to be a pro, there's no better path than the one that Riley had early on. I mean, come on, traveling the world at 18, shooting the best skiers on the planet, and then Red Bull and Nike. His life was beyond good, and then the accident happened. And when I was talking to Riley leading up to the podcast, I thought the accident would be such a terrible thing to talk about. But he's one of those super positive people that always looks at things like this as helping him make him the man he is today. And when he said to me that he wouldn't change a thing, I kind of believe him. That's why he's such an inspiration. He's never played the victim, and he's always been moving forward. And when he suggested to me that I come down to Portland and see a show with him, I felt really honored, and that's something that I hope I can make happen in the near future. After talking to Riley, he's definitely a dude I want to spend some time with, and I really appreciate everything he had to say. I hope you enjoyed his story. At this point, I also need to mention that Dave Swanee Swanwick, the world extreme champion and legendary skier who got Riley on Dynastar, is the dude I want to get on this podcast, and I reached out to him to let him know that. He didn't seem super interested on recording with me, but he was keen to tell me about the THC and CBD gummy blends that he's been making, and he sent me some samples. Since I'm not using THC, I gave them to my wife, as weed has been a way better option than the pills for her side effects, and she's been sleeping like a baby with these. If you want to try out what Swanee's making, head on over to shopnewhorizon.com, and when you check out, enter the code POWELL20, that's all caps and the number 20 with no spaces, and you'll get 20% off. I get nothing out of this other than hopefully getting Swanee on the podcast. Thanks for that, Dave. Thank you all for listening for the past 400 episodes, and I'm excited to continue to deliver you the best content in snow on a weekly basis. Now it's time in the show where I'm going to ask you to review me wherever you listen to me and ask you to support the brands that make this show happen. They are Stanley, Elon Skis, Outdoor Research, Peter Glenn Ski and Sports, Best Day Brewing, and Club Med. Have a great week, everyone.